much, Brother Hatcher. It's truly a pleasure to be here in this lectureship. I always enjoy coming to Bellview. And when I get to come to Pensacola and to Bellevue, just there are many precious memories that flood my soul. And I remember the great saints that have been a part of this congregation for many years. When Dad preached at Foley, when I was just a lad, we would come over to meetings just about all the time, and enjoyed being with the Brantleys and others who were here. And this congregation has been very close to me all down through the years. I love and appreciate Brother Klein, and I miss him greatly. And yet he lives on, and his influence, and I am very appreciative of that. It's good to be with Brother Michael Hatcher. Brother Hatcher is a great man, and I am honored to be associated with him in a number of different ways. But he is the secretary of our board. Appreciate the work that he does, and it's good to be with him working with the Gospel Journal. I hope that each one of you has subscribed to the Gospel Journal, and I hope that you also have subscribed to Contending for the Faith. These are two great papers. You need both of them. And we appreciate the work of Brother Brown and his fine wife in the Contending. It's good to be on the platform tonight with Brother Bob Houghton. And Brother and Sister Houghton are here, and Sister Box is here. You remember Danny Box? We certainly miss him. And he was an outstanding gospel preacher. Brother Bob Houghton is a hard worker in the kingdom. And Andy, our son, oldest son, is privileged to preach at East Point, Tuscaloosa, where they are. And they certainly are an encouragement to Andy and his family. We appreciate that. Good to share the platform also tonight with Brother Bobby Liddell, who is doing a great work at school. I wish we had time to just reminisce about these things. But I appreciate very much. You can start my time now, by the way. It's good to be here. I appreciate getting to enjoy all these wonderful associations together. One of the greatest questions in all the ages is, if a man dies, shall he live again? And I have realized in the past year and a half, more keenly than ever, the fact of the value of this question. Because I have faced death. And there are others in this audience who've done the same thing. And so you think about life after death. You realize your mortality. And more than you have ever realized it before. Job realized his mortality. Job was greatly troubled. He had many adversaries. And he had especially the adversary Satan. And the battle that was going on in the book of Job was between God and Satan. And Job was in between. And it's not an easy thing to be in a battle that's going on between God and Satan and be in the middle. All of us are. And Job surely was. And Job was pure gold, though. And he came out as pure gold after he was refined in the fire. And we need to have the same determination. If you live long enough, you're going to have a lot of problems. Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Job 14:1. And Job had problems with Satan trying to destroy him, taking away everything he had, killing his 10 children. He thought God did it. And then Satan destroyed Job's health and got him within a gnat's eyelash of death. God said you can do anything you want to with it, but don't you kill it. And I can imagine how close Job got to death. And then he had his wife calling upon him to commit suicide after he cursed God. Well, he refused to do either. And then the 3 friends came. And with that kind of friends, you don't have to have any enemies. And they said, you are a rank grievous sinner, and all of your 3 children, your 10 children, were grievous sinners. That's the reason why God killed them. Well, he still blessed God. And he said, though God kill me, which he's doing, he thought, I'm not going to turn my back on God. And that shows how ridiculous some people think, even members of the church. There are some people that carry a little chip on their shoulder, just right up there. And they'll make sure that they stick that chip out all the time toward other members of the church, just daring them to brush up against it. And if they do, you know what they do? They say, I'll quit the church. I'm going to quit the church. So-and-so brushed up against that chip on my shoulder. Well, I'll tell you what, Job would have turned his back on God from the start if it had the attitude of some of us. But Job faced death. And he faced many problems. And the main problem was that one he had been used to talking to all the time refused to talk to him anymore. God wouldn't talk to him. And he just couldn't understand that. And yet he hung in there. If a man die, shall he live again? Job 14:14. The answer is yes. This is a rhetorical question. Death is a fact that's common to all mankind. Sin brought it about. 1 Corinthians 15:56, Genesis 2:16 and 17. God told Adam and Eve, the day that you eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll surely die. They were separated from God that day, and they began dying physically that day when they were separated from the tree. That was the veritable fountain of youth, the tree of life. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. As a result of sin, we die. When you look at the cemetery, don't blame God. He tried his best to keep people from sinning. Blame the tempter. Blame Satan. When you lose a family member or child, don't blame God. And don't tell somebody that's lost a little baby, well, it was God's will. They have enough trouble dealing with it without our putting the blame on God for it. But anyway, the story of the Bible from the beginning is, and he died. Turn to the book of Genesis and see how many times the book of Genesis says, and he died. Notice that in Genesis chapter 5, verse 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 27, 31, 9, 29. We could notice a number of others. And he died. The ratio is the same that it's always been: one death for one life. If you're living, you're going to die. And so, we might as well prepare for it. Now, I want you to know that when we begin this study tonight, that I completely and absolutely reject the idea, the absurd, God-denying notion that the resurrection is not taught and was not believed in the Old Testament. That's ridiculous. Amen. The adherents of neo-orthodoxy, that is existentialism, and other critics of Bible truth, affirm falsely that the fundamentals of the faith evolved. This idea of the very existence of God evolved. Sigmund Freud said man wished God into existence. The truth about the matter is man is trying to wish God out of existence. But anyway, the sonship of Jesus Christ evolved down through the ages in man's mind. The virgin birth, the vicarious suffering and death, the atoning blood of Christ, the resurrection of Christ bodily, and the general resurrection in the last day, they say all of this evolved. Well, it did not. It was given by God and taught by God. And we'll notice that. Paul speaks of those who are characterized by being vain in their imaginations and having their senseless heart darkened. Romans chapter 1 verse 18, because they refuse to have God, to retain God in their knowledge, and they refuse to look to the Bible as the inspired, inerrant, plenary Word of God. Now, why is it that they have perverted ideas? Because they have abandoned the truth. And perverted ideas come with perverted religions and all kinds of perverted activities today. And it ends in vain speculation and in vain imagination. And it also ends in homosexuality. Romans 1, 18 through 28. Now, we don't have any problem with that in this country, do we? Further, I want to say that I refuse to allow the modernistic skepticism about what the Bible teaches to dictate to me as to what the Bible is saying, what God is saying in the Word. I'm not a scholar, I'm not the son of a scholar, nor a dresser of sycamore trees. But I have no desire to fit in with the so-called scholars, whom the world classifies as scholars. And I don't have any desire to fit in with the Scholars Conference among the so-called brethren. Now, I'm certain that many of the scholars in the brotherhood will differ from me tonight, but that's all right. They differed with people earlier when they taught the truth, and they'll differ with me tonight. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 4, Paul spoke as not pleasing men, but God who proveth our hearts. And in chapter 2 and verse 6 of 1 Thessalonians, Paul said, I don't seek the glory of men, neither from you or from others. And brethren, if you're trying to preach the gospel and you're seeking the glory of men, you're in the wrong business. So what I tell you tonight is, if you examine it, if it be the truth, accept it. If it be false, reject it. Now this is your responsibility, because you're to be like the Bereans of old, who examined what Paul was saying and tested it by the Scriptures, that they pulverized. They went through with a fine-tooth comb to see if what he was teaching was truth. Brother Robert Taylor says, he wrote, Old Testament worthies were not nearly as ignorant of the spirit of man and the resurrection of the body as modernistic skeptics of current times have sought to make them. A modern infidel like Harry M. Orlinsky, one of the RSV translators, by the way, is on public record as saying the immortality of the soul was unknown to Old Testament personalities. Now, my friends, he and others like him are dead wrong. What a contrast in the writing of the Psalm of Life by William Wordsworth Longfellow. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not written of the soul. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present. Heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. And so what we're going to do is try from the Old Testament to give you some thoughts in answer to the question, if a man die, shall he live again? And then we're going to go to Job 14 and see what Job says in that particular chapter. Let us notice the resurrection in the Old Testament. David said in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 3, there is but a step between me and death. And there is. Several weeks ago, a week ago or so, a couple of weeks ago, I had to go to the emergency room with 10% breathing capacity. I was turning purple. There's but a breath between us and death. If a man dies, shall he live again? Brother C.D. Plum stated, as surely as man dies, he shall live again. The Word of God teaches the resurrection as strongly as it teaches the certainty of death. Well, the question is, does the Old Testament give just a glimmer of hope or none at all? Some of the scholars say, well, there's a hint of it. And others say, it's not in there at all. Concerning the quote scholars, Howard Horton wrote this. Scholars have expressed disappointment that so few passages in the Old Testament express unquestionable assurance of the resurrection of the body. A few passages will illustrate both the glimmer of hope and the faintness of the affirmation. I don't believe that for half of a split second. He needs to go back, study his Bible, and stop reading the liberals and the modernists. Charles Gresham wrote a book on the resurrection in the College Press. Here's what he said. That's the Disciples of Christ group or Christian church. It is generally conceived that there is little about resurrection or afterlife in which the Jews call the Torah. Brother, I don't conceive that. Now, he needs to speak for himself. And the former prophets, that is the historical books of the Old Testament, that is the 5 books of Moses and the historical books. Death is seen as the end. I deny that. The destruction of human existence. Many feel that this general concept of death is not invalidated by those isolated accounts of individuals returning to life. Well, let's see about that. So the question is there just a faintness or a glimmer of hope back there of the resurrection in the Old Testament? Or is the resurrection in the Old Testament totally absent? You read parts of the commentaries on Job 14, and you see whether or not even some of our own brethren believe that the Old Testament talked about the resurrection, and that they believed in the resurrection. I'm going to make some arguments. You can answer them. Go to it. And I'm going to make some arguments from the Old Testament that proves that the Old Testament teaches the resurrection. First, man is made in the image of God. speaking to his fellow creators about man's spiritual nature, God said, let us make man in our image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Now man was made in the image of God. You and I are in the image of God. And Solomon wrote that God put eternity in our hearts. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11. You believe that? Now, that's Old Testament, isn't it? Genesis 1's Old Testament, isn't it? Now, we're made in the image of God. That is, we're the offspring of God. Acts chapter 17, verses 28 and 29. And Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 9, God is the Father of spirits. So He's our Father. He's the Father of spirits. He created the soul within man. I submit to you that if man is made in the image of God and he's the offspring of God, man will never cease to exist. He cannot. It is impossible for man to cease to exist. Because you might as well talk about the annihilation of God as talk about the annihilation of His offspring. What kind of offspring do you have? Human beings? Better believe it. We're made in the image of God. We have an eternal spirit. Once conceived, the human spirit will never cease to exist. What a powerful argument for the eternal existence of man and the resurrection of the eternal spirit. Number 2. I want you to notice the faith in the resurrection in the Old Testament. Abraham was a great example of faith. And he had faith in what? He had faith in the resurrection. He believed that he would be raised from the dead. You know when he went into a country which after he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went by faith? Because he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. You know how he would be able to go to that city? He would be raised from the dead. That's the only way to go to heaven. In addition to that, when Abraham offered Isaac, you know what he told those servants when they'd made 3 days' journey to the foot of the mountain where God told him to sacrifice his son? He said, you fellows stay here. The lad and I shall go up on the mountain and worship and shall return thither. Not everything they were doing was worship. Now I want you to notice that you have a compound subject and a compound predicate. The lad and I shall go. Compound subject. The lad and I are going to come back. So compound predicate. Now how did he know that? Because he believed in the resurrection of Christ. And Hebrews chapter 11 says that he was willing to offer Abraham, offer his son Isaac on the altar because he knew that God would raise him from the dead. And you tell me that there is no resurrection found in the Old Testament. It makes you tired. You know when Hannah prayed, what she prayed? She prayed, Jehovah killeth and maketh alive. Now look at that, brethren. That's 1 Samuel 2:6. He bringeth down to Sheol and bringeth up. If that's not the resurrection, I'll eat this pulpit stand. Somebody said, well, that's just she talking about the idea that God was going to give her a son. Whatever he was raising was going to go down to Sheol. Did his son go down to Sheol? Her son, before God enabled her to have birth of that son? Absolutely not. It is in the context of glorying in God's wisdom and power. Chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. But then David realized that there was going to be a resurrection. There's going to be an eternal, immortal existence. In the presence of he would be in the presence of his son. He prayed that the Lord might spare his son. But his son died. Notice 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 23. Now he is dead, wherefore shall I fast? Shall I bring him back again? I shall go to him. but he'll not return unto me. Now, what did he believe? He believed that he would be raised from the dead, that his son would be raised from the dead, and both of them would spend eternity together. Now look at Ezekiel. And now that's Old Testament, folks. That's not New Testament. Look at Ezekiel. In the valley of dry bones that God enabled Ezekiel to see. He said, son of man, can these bones live? You know how Ezekiel could appreciate that? There's only one way. He had faith in the resurrection at the last day. That's the only way. Otherwise, the vision would have been completely without understanding. When the bones were reattached, and the sinews, and the flesh, and the skin covered them, and the breath re-entered them, and they lived and stood on their feet. Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14. Now, how can you understand that if the Old Testament did not teach and does not teach the resurrection? He didn't believe in the resurrection. You know what he responded? O Lord Jehovah, thou knowest. He clearly acknowledged God's power to raise from the dead. And he illustrated with the resurrection the return of his people, the restoration of his people as a nation after Babylonian captivity. What about Enoch and Elijah? They were translated. Well, the power of God is seen in this. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 5, verse 23 and 24, he was not because God took him. He was translated. Not only can God raise the dead, but he can keep death's powers from having an effect and touching those whom he would call to himself. No. It's not stated about Enoch and he died like other people. You know what Paul stated? By faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death. Hebrews 11:5. Now what about Elijah? Well, he was translated just like Enoch was. There appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire like the angels. And these took Elijah up in the whirlwind into heaven. As the sons of the prophet had earlier told Elisha that his master was going to be taken up. Now these things were historical reality. That's not myth, symbolism, or imagination. In fact, the Jews themselves thought that Elijah was coming back during Christ's day. Get the book and notice these references. You know what? The Bible says that if God could translate Enoch and Elijah, he can certainly raise the dead at the last day. That's Old Testament. I want you to notice that people are still alive in Sheol. That's the Old Testament. That's saying that. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 6, God told Moses, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now Abraham had died and he was gathered to his people. Jacob had died and he was gathered to his people. Their souls had been gathered to their righteous ancestors. Let me tell you, death is not extinction, as the Sadducees believed it to be. What did Christ say about this? Well, as touching the resurrection of dead, have ye not read that which was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Matthew 11, 31 and 32. And so the patriarchs were very much alive in Sheol. But I want you to notice something else now. Luke 20, 37 and 38. Christ affirmed the resurrection when he said, but that the dead are raised. Quote, even Moses showed, now notice that, Moses showed that the dead are raised in the place concerning the bush when he calleth the Lord the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Now he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live unto him. Luke 20, 37 and 38. Now, what does Christ say? If you're going to reject the Old Testament as teaching the resurrection, you're going to have to reject me. Well, you're prepared to reject the Lord. Again, while Rachel was giving birth to Benjamin, the Bible says her soul was departed. Notice the difference between the soul and the body. Genesis 35:18. Her immortal nature went to the place of departed spirit, Sheol, to await the resurrection. Jacob believed his son Joseph had gone down to Sheol, though he thought that the beast had killed him. Bible says he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I will go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Genesis 37-35. What about Saul? Well, Saul, the king, went to the woman that had a familiar spirit at Endor, and he said, "Bring me up Samuel." Well, you know what? Surprise, surprise, she brought up Samuel. She cried out with a loud voice and said, "What is this you've done? You're Saul." Now, I want you to notice something. Samuel spoke to Saul, and he said, "Saul, why have you disquieted me to bring me up? I don't want to be here. I don't want to be concerned about these matters." Now, my friends, the Old Testament didn't teach the resurrection and immortality. That's a bunch of Tommy ride. I want you to notice some were raised bodily in the Old Testament times. Now, Gresham said this doesn't prove now the resurrection. Well, I wonder what it does prove. The Bible says Elijah prayed to God concerning the death of the son of the widow of Zarephath. "O Jehovah, my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him." And the soul of the child came to him, and he revived. He was resurrected from the dead. Now imagine that. When the child of the Shunammite was dead, laid upon his bed, you know, Elisha raised him from the dead. I'll take my watch. I'll start going by my watch now. Child sneezed 7 times. Child opened his eyes, 2 Kings 4. Now, isn't that amazing? There is no resurrection in the Old Testament, folks. And what about the person who was thrown into corpse, cast into the sepulchre of Elisha? Came to life. He was raised from the dead. What about the prophecies of Christ's resurrection? "For thou wilt not leave my soul in Sheol, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." Psalm 16:10. Now, Peter said this is talking about Christ. That's Old Testament, folks. Christ's suffering servant was cut off from the land of the living. His grave was made with the wicked. And yet, God would prosper Christ in his hand. That is, he would be raised from the dead. Hosea said that he would be raised from the dead the 3rd day. Is that the resurrection? Is that the Old Testament? What about the general resurrection of the last day? Notice this, Psalm 17. I wish I had more time. "As for me, I shall behold thy face in righteousness," David said. "I shall be satisfied when I wake, be it with beholding thy form." Now it's contrasted with the wicked. Their joy is in this life. The joy of the righteous is in the life which is to come. Notice Psalm 49:15. "But God will redeem my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me." God will rescue me from the grave. Isaiah says he has swallowed up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from off all their faces. Isaiah 25:8. Is that the resurrection? Well, it's quoted in the New Testament as being the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 and other passages. I wish I had time to go into that. Daniel prophesied of the general resurrection. "Many of them that sleep in the dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt." Daniel chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. What about the judgment at the last day? Now, how are you going to be judged without the resurrection? Does the Old Testament say anything about the judgment? Well, Daniel said, Job 19:29, the oldest book in the Bible. Be ye afraid of the sword. He says this to his three friends. For wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. If there's no resurrection, explain that to me, please. And he knew that he was going to stand before God. Well, let me say a word about our subject. Turn to Job 14. In Job 14, 7 through 12, most of the commentaries that I read, virtually all of them say, well, all of them that I've read say that man, when he dies, is just like a tree. He has no hope. He has despaired of all hope of being raised from the dead. Verse 12. So man lieth down and riseth not, till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake. Now be roused out of their sleep. The tree has more hope than man does. Cut down a tree, here's a sprig coming up. Man is cut down, he's in the grave, his body is, you can forget it. Well, don't forget, I'm not trying to impress any scholars, and I'm not one. But I reject what they say about these passages. When the heavens and the earth are no more, we shall be raised from the dead. But notice verse 13, oh, that thou wouldst hide me in Sheol. All of a sudden, he catches his breath and he thinks, well, I do have hope. I think he's indicated before then he had hope. Oh, that thou wouldst hide me in Sheol, that thou would keep me secret until thy wrath be past. He thought that God was angry at him, and he thought he was killing him. You're angry at me for some reason. You're going to kill me. I'm going into the grave. But one of these days, you're going to forget that anger, and you're going to want to see me. That thou wouldst appoint me a set time and remember me. Want to see me. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of the warfare will I wait till my release should come. Now notice verse 15. Powerful verse. Thou wouldst call, and I would answer thee. Thou wouldst have a desire to see the work of thy hands. Formed him in the grave, formed him what he was spiritually, made him what he was. He says, Lord, after I die and I'm in the grave, that is my body, one of these days you're going to want to see me. And you're going to raise me from the dead. You're going to call my name, I'm going to come forth. And then, Job 19, I'm going to stand before thee, and I'm not going to stand before thee as an enemy. That's the way you view me now. He thought that. Actually, the devil was destroying him. But he said, I'm going to see my God face to face. For myself, and not as an enemy, but as a friend. Because Christ, chapter 9, chapter 13, chapter 16, as the God-man, will put his hand on the shoulder of God and put his other hand on the shoulder of man, because he's the God-man. And he'll reconcile Job to God. No longer an enemy, but as a friend. Did it go over?